Bible study started for tonight. So let's go ahead and take some prayer requests. Who we want to be praying for tonight? Wow, that got quiet. No prayer requests? Sandy?
Yes, my son just left Kansas and he's going to be working for Colorado. He's going right back to Ohio. Then 2 days later, he's driving down here.
Okay.
He just travel.
Okay, Sandy's son and his travel.
Jason.
Okay, Jason. Remember Jason as he travels. Shelly Caswell's joined us online tonight. So go ahead, Dawn.
So you keep Bob in prayers, but he didn't get his nerves locked.
Okay. Keep Bob Harlow in your prayers and just health and his back and
I offered to walk on his back.
yeah. Gene Hunker has joined us as well. So Gene and Shelly are online, joining us from online. Sally?
Our daughter is from a hematologist, and he doesn't seem real concerned other than the fact that he's really concerned about the low hemoglobin. But her stomach pain has stopped since we started praying, which is a great praise report. But in 2 weeks, she's going to have 2 iron infusion IVs, and then a bunch of other lab work. We're just going to have to start checking things off to figure out what's wrong.
All right, so Jim and Sally's daughter. Joyce?
My grandson Justin has a spot of melanoma on his back and he's having surgery next Friday.
Okay,
So
okay.
he didn't-
All right, and what's his first name?
Justin.
Justin, keep him in your prayers. All right, Jane?
I have a cousin. Her name is Kelly Bryson. Her father just recently passed away. Her mother just is going to be in ICU. Her father-in-law just died. Her mother-in-law just died, all from COVID.
Wow.
So this was in a month period.
Wow.
So she needs some prayers.
And what is her first name?
Kelly,
Kelly, a friend of Jane's. Okay. All right. Who else tonight? Anyone else? Continue to pray for Sandy Honeycutt. She is continuing to have chemo, correct? Judy saw her today, so just keep Sandy Honeycutt in your prayers. All right. Anyone else tonight? All right. I'm going to ask Larry Hampton to open us in prayer tonight, and then we'll get into our Bible study.
Most gracious Heavenly Father, we again come to you and study and learn your word and learn how you want us to live. But we also come to the time of prayer. And as we hear these names and the issues that they are facing, we just raise their names up to you and ask that you provide the healing and comfort they need and just take care of them as long as you can. But we also thank you for looking after us, for loving us, for blessing us. And we thank you for the Son that came and died on the cross for us for forgiveness of our sin. Just ask you to continue to look after all our family and friends, guide, protect, and comfort them, fight for their needs, their well-being, their safety, and just bless them as long as you can. And again, for those that are in need of healing and comforting, we just ask that only you can provide that. And we just ask for you to look after them now and take care of them and provide for anyone they need. I ask forgiveness where we fall or short. And I do these things in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. All right, we are still going through the Old Testament. We made it through all the books of history, ending with Esther last night. And so tonight we are in the book of Job. I'm just kidding. Job. We're in the book of Job tonight.
they said job on
Jeopardy? Yeah, that always cracks me up. Two mispronunciations that crack me up is Job and Revelations. Okay. So we're in the book of Job tonight. Now, we don't know who wrote the book of Job. There are a couple different theories as to who could have written it, but we don't know. Some think that maybe a contemporary of Solomon may have written it just in the way that it is written. Job is what's called in the category of wisdom and poetry. It would be more wisdom than poetry, but we don't even know if this is written you know, as an illustration, as a lesson to us about who God is, rather than being a story about a man really named Job. We don't know that. We kind of can approximate the time that it was written, somewhere between 2100 and 1900 BC. We know that the overview of this book, it is about a man named Job who goes through intense suffering and testing, losing everything. One of the most famous verses from it is Job's wonderful encouragement from his wife, who says, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." He replied, "You are talking like a foolish woman." I don't know how he lived after saying that, but shall we accept good from God and not trouble? And that's out of Job chapter 2. Let's go ahead and just kind of jump in to the book of Job. In the very first chapter, we learn about Job, and Ken has joined us online as well. And Ken, good to have you with us for our Bible study. In chapter 1 of Job, we learn about a man living in the land of Uz. Now, because they name a country, it leads us to believe that Job was indeed a real man, and that this was not just, a story that was written to just illustrate some truth. And so that's all right. And so we see that it was about a man who lived in Uz, named Job, and it tells really about how much God had blessed him in chapter 1. He blessed him. What are some ways that God blessed Job in chapter 1, if you've read Job? Okay, he blessed him with children. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Okay, how else? Animals. Yeah, he said 7,000 sheep. I don't know, I guess that is a lot to own, definitely. 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. What do you think they mean by of the East? East of what? What's that? I think you really could have been talking about east of the Jordan. Some might say east of, because again, at this time by Job, we're back in the promised land. And there still is even a lot of disagreement about exactly where Eden was. So again, not only the fact that they named him as being from Uz, but that he was the greatest from the East, that kind of indicates to us that this was not just written as some illustration, but that this was a story of a real man. Now, so we see everything that Job did, his wealth, his blessings, his businesses. I mean, he had it all. And then in chapter 1, we kind of switch throughout the book of Job. We switch from the earthly realm to the heavenly realm. And all of a sudden we switch to the heavenly realm. The angels have come before God's presence, out doing their bidding. And the devil comes with him. And so verses 7, really 6 and 7 and 8, Satan answered the Lord about where he had been. I've been roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. What would have Satan have been doing roaming back and forth on the earth? Okay. Yeah, remember the verse, and it tells us he roams around like a prowling lion, waiting to seek who he can devour. And so, yeah, he would have just been roaming around the earth, seeing what kind of havoc he could bring. And we see this conversation between God and Satan. Have you considered my servant Job? No one like him, the best of the best. And so Job issues this challenge. Well, he's only like that because you've given him so much. That's the only reason he's faithful to you, is that you have given him, you have blessed him. You take away his possessions, you take away his wealth, and he will, he's going to turn his back on you. He's going to curse you. And so God gives the devil permission he turns over Job's wealth to the devil. The devil can do with it whatever he wants, but you notice there's a little clause in there, but you cannot touch on him. You cannot lay a finger on the man himself. And so throughout the rest of chapter 1, Job has what we would call, a very bad day. And every moment of it gets worse. His sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house. And see, nothing ever good comes from drinking wine, right? They're drinking at the older brother's house. A messenger came into Job, and messenger after messenger comes. Job loses cattle. He loses his wealth. His slaves, verse 18, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine when suddenly a mighty wind swept from the desert and struck the four corners of the house, and it collapsed on them and they're dead. And I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you this. And so Job, everything, he loses everything. And notice what his reply is in verse 20. He doesn't curse God for taking everything from him, but instead he tore his robe, shaved his head, which would have been very customary for mourning. And aren't we glad that that's not the way we mourn now? No comment, Dawn. And so Job says, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked will I depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. So let's just start tonight by asking, how difficult would it be for you and I, even not including our family, how difficult would it be for you and I? What is something that you and I could lose in our life that, let's just be real honest with each other, it would cause us great turmoil and maybe not cause us to curse God, but we'd definitely be upset with him. Okay, if our home was just suddenly destroyed, okay, all right.
Is that family?
Okay, our family, if we lost loved ones, okay.
Al losing his sight.
Okay, yeah, our health, if when we're afflicted with health issues, lose our good health. Anything else?
I was going to say spouse, but I'm taking it back out.
Okay. Larry says spouse, but now he's thinking twice. Ken says 2020 all rolled into one. Okay, is what this sounds like we're reading here. All right. Shelley Caswell says losing your husband. Okay. Financial, losing finances. Okay, so all of those things would really, bring turmoil on us. And one of the reasons they would is, and this doesn't make us bad people at all, it just makes us human beings. We do enjoy the blessings that God gives us. And to lose those blessings, it is going to affect us. It is going to, play a part in our relationship with others. It is going to probably affect our relationship with God. For Job, he was able to say, look, I came into this world with nothing. Even if I leave it with nothing, God is still God. And, he's on the throne. And so, he's able to have that attitude. So chapter 2, the angels come back into God's presence. We switch back to the heavenly realms, the spiritual realm. And the angels have come back in. Job has come back, or not Job, the devil has come back. And again, God says, hey, what about Job? And he says, well, I tell you what, if you gave him some physical affliction, a little bit of pain. This is almost like any of you have kids, when you were kids or when you were younger or you had young kids, you ever remember playing the game Mercy? Okay, you reach out with your hands and you grab each other's hands and then you see who can bend each other's hands back. Or I had an uncle who loved to play the game Uncle, where he'd take my arm and twist it behind my back until I would yell Uncle. It's almost like a game of that where the devil says, let's just see how much we can make Job suffer before he breaks. And so God gives the devil the power to afflict Job, but not to the point of death. You can't kill him. Now, so here's where we really get to the heart of the book of Job. The ultimate question that is asked in the book of Job, and I think we wrestle with it in our world today, is this. If God is truly a loving God, and if he is all-powerful, how do you explain suffering? Now, I know we'd like to, just give a quick Band-Aid answer and say, well, God's on the throne, so, it's just there. But it is a question, agnostics who, really have a lot of doubt about the reality of God. It's one of the things that they wrestle with, or atheists wrestle with. If God is real, then why is there suffering? If he's all powerful, then he should be able to eliminate all suffering. If he's all loving, then he wouldn't let us suffer. So one of those can't be true. And so the real question begins, what do we do with the issue of suffering in our world? I know some of you got it. Go ahead. No, go right ahead. This is we want to share tonight. We want to do that.
Okay, well, so I did a study of the divine council,
Mm-hmm.
which is who God is meeting with these angels.
Yes.
The divine council. There's a couple of things from the Jewish perspective. Whenever you see statement in the Bible, it's asatan, which
Mhm.
is a function, a job,
Mhm.
not a person.
Right.
So it'd be like the accuser, the adversary.
Yeah. Mhm.
So my question is, do you think, as opposed to being Lucifer in front of
Yes.
God, because I imagine that would be really weird,
Mm-hmm.
is it the devil's advocate?
Yeah.
It's the accuser of the brethren up there going, well, so-and-so's not as righteous as you think he is, and it kind of throws that down in front of God, in front of the council going, he kind of went above his pay grade, I think,
Yeah.
a little bit,
Yeah.
in throwing
Yeah.
those things out about Job.
Sure.
And what is God's choice? He has to show that he's God and also show that, what he's saying isn't true, but I can't fix it.
Mhm.
I know about Job. I know Job's heart.
Mhm.
But I'm gonna let this play out.
Yeah.
And does that happen still today?
So let's start with the question of, is this really the devil in God's presence? We know from reading in Ezekiel, we can even read some in Revelation, where we're kind of given the idea that in the beginning, the devil was a beautiful angel, and he allowed pride and ego to get in the way and to aspire to be equal with God. And so God cast him out of the heavenly realms, and he took a third of the angels with him. Now, we get that idea from Scripture. Is that exactly how it happened? It depends on how you interpret those scriptures. And so I do think that there is the possibility that this is a conversation that's taking place not in heaven, because he's already been cast out of there. But I think it is taking place in the spiritual dimension. Because what does Paul tell us in Ephesians about the full armor of God? our battle's not against flesh and blood. Our battle is against the powers of darkness, the principalities, the spiritual forces of evil in the what realms? In the spiritual realms or the heavenly realms. So I think this could be a meeting that's taking place, because if the devil can be everywhere except for heaven because he was cast out of it, we know that God can be everywhere, all places. So I do think it could be a meeting that takes place between God and his angels, and demons. And now that's one thing, and again, this is a completely different Bible study, but you and I, we don't really get a glimpse of what goes on in the spiritual world, but it is around us. It is a completely different dimension than the physical realm. And I'm not, trying to be ultra supernatural here, but I do believe that around us all of the time, there is a spiritual battle that's taking place between the forces of evil and angels, battling for your mind and your heart, battling for my mind and my heart. I do believe that there still is such a thing as demon possession. And so I do believe that we still see this going on. So whether this was actually the devil or not, I don't know. It's a very possible conversation that's taking place. Let me just grab Ken's comment here. Ken says, free will and things we suffer through make us stronger in our belief and trust in God. And again, for us as Christians, it's easy, I won't say it's easy, but, we think this is exactly how we know how it is. We know why there's evil in this world. The problem comes, though, when we are A, going through it, or B, when we are seeing it unfold in ways that we don't expect, especially when it unfolds in the lives of those who aren't believers. And then we have to try to give them an answer. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's very hard to wrap your head around the story of Job, because you have to recognize that there's a wager going on in the spiritual realm, and it has as a human, we're emphasizing the Job like, oh, it's got to be difficult. But in the spiritual realm, it's like a wager. And you say, how can that be? How can you be making? But I think the answer comes at the end, where all things, there's nothing more important than the worship of God.
Yeah. And you're right. And it's easy to look at this book of Job and to think, man, God was pretty manipulative. Job was like a pawn in God's great chess game with the devil. And it's easy to look at that. How I would, though, encourage you to look at it is not as a game of chess, but in a battle in which sometimes you have to lose some battles to win the war. And in our world today, the same thing is true. God allows a certain amount of suffering to go on in our world. And it's not that he can't stop it. And it's not that he doesn't want to stop it. But again, here's what we realize. And I'm not sure who Chad Andrelli is, but he's joined our Bible.
That's our Chad.
Oh, that's Chad. Okay, great. Duh.
Hi, Chad.
I'm sorry, I'm slow. But Chad is with us, and he says, our hardships, I think, are given to us for the glory of God. And 300 camels, our jobs, and so, sometimes, again, yes, suffering comes into our lives. And sorry, Chad, I just didn't recognize your last name. Sometimes suffering comes into our lives, and God uses those for his glory. Now, before we get into Job's wonderful crew of friends that come to see him, I want to point out something very important here right at the outset. God is, I don't want to use the word never, but most of the time, God is not the author of our suffering. There are times when he may bring some suffering into our lives to discipline us. I mean, I don't know if anybody in here ever heard this phrase. I heard it many times because I was such a wonderful little kid. Okay, this is going to hurt you more than it's going to hurt me. No, I'm sorry. This is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you. That's what my dad would say. Well, there's no way it hurt my dad more than it hurt me. Maybe it did, but we hear that phrase whenever we're about to get disciplined.
And Jim,
Yes.
I mean, everybody's, people will blame God for something, but like bad health, whatever. What's to say it's not the devil that has his hand in that instead of God?
Yeah.
And God, he will test us to get our trust in him and to see how loyal we are.
Yeah. Now, and you're right. And so, first of all, God is not usually the author of our suffering. Sometimes it's other people, and they bring suffering into our lives. And sometimes, guess what? It's the result of our own choices.
Yes.
When we don't live a healthy lifestyle, and then we have health problems, well, guess what? The Bible is true. We reap what we sow. And so sometimes our suffering sometimes we are completely innocent and suffering comes into our lives because of somebody else. Somebody minding their own business and a drunk driver in the middle of the night hits them. Not their fault. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so sometimes other people bring suffering into our lives. Go ahead, Don.
Well, going back to Eden, we still have free will. Holy Spirit within us is telling what we should do, what we shouldn't do. And if we don't listen, it's on us.
Yeah. And so you're right. So sometimes the suffering is due to other people. Sometimes it's due to our own choices. And sometimes it is the devil wreaking havoc into our lives. We can never forget what Jesus told us in John chapter 10. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And he's not here to have fun with us. And he's not here to entertain us and to give us good things. He is here to completely destroy, our lives. And so suffering quite often comes from one of those. Now, again, why doesn't it go ahead, Sandy?
When I think about when I'm going through something that's very devastating or, changes something in my life, I think that's the moment on my knees I turn to God right then.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I can't take care of it myself and no one I know can, I always trust God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I do it immediately. I just get down and I can't do this. I need your help.
Yeah.
And that, to me, he doesn't purposely make problems, but when problems arrive, he certainly wants you to do that, to turn to him. Because I know personally, it's much easier with him than without him.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Jim, he doesn't tempt us ever.
No.
He tests us.
Yeah.
But he doesn't tempt us. And if we didn't go through any rough times, we wouldn't win.
Right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, thinking about why there's still evil in the world and why God doesn't just wave a wand and remove all suffering. Well, again, let's go back to the beginning in the Garden of Eden. If God had never put the tree of knowledge of good and the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life in the garden, if he had never given Adam and Eve the opportunity to disobey him, then do they really love him? Are they really obedient to him because they want to be? One of my jokes that I told Al last week, Adam and Eve are in the garden and Eve says, who do you love? Or Eve says, do you love me? And Adam says, well, who else? So God had to allow, God doesn't want us to love him and serve him and be obedient to him because we've got no other choice. He does give us this wonderful thing of free will. The devil had it as well, and he chose, to exercise that free will. We all have that free will.
Also, if God gave us everything, we wouldn't we wouldn't want to call on him.
Right.
We have everything.
Yeah. And so there is the reality of suffering in our world. Now, in chapter 3, Job kind of speaks out, about what has taken place in his life. Now, over the next many chapters out of the book of Job, all the way up to, I believe, chapter 28, Job has 3 friends, and they always come in the same order. And they each one give a speech. Chapter 4 is Eliphaz, and then Job responds to him in chapter 6. In chapter 6 and 7. In chapter 8, Eliphaz, and then the second friend, Bildad, and Job again responds to him in 9 and 10. And then in chapter 11, Zophar. Each one of them comes and they consider themselves to be great theologians. They consider themselves to be the wisest of Job's friends. And we can solve your problem. Again, the big question for Job here is why? Why is this happening to me? And each of his 3 friends think that they have an answer. The thrust of all of these 3 friends' speech to Job, they all follow the same kind of reasoning. You had everything in your life, and you were probably living right, but then you began to sin and live wrong, and now you are experiencing God's judgment. Okay, so that's the premise. You live right, everything goes right. You live wrong, suffering. I don't know if you realize this, but that teaching, that belief is still very much around in our world today. There's been times where I've been out on the golf course and I've hit a lucky putt and said, well, I must be living right, And sometimes people do that. Something bad goes on in their life and they think, oh, what did I do? I must have done something, to deserve this. God's getting me. Okay, he's punishing me. I did something wrong. And all of his friends, urge Job, man, if you want this suffering to end, just confess what you've done. Just acknowledge the sin. And now we can flip that around. We can look at it from Job's perspective. Job is like, I'm innocent. And so for Job, if what his friends are saying is true, for Job, then God is not a just God because I haven't done anything wrong. Now, I know that's kind of a simplification, but we see this same pattern go on throughout the first chapters. He replies to each of his friends. Again, chapter 15, Eliphaz comes around. Chapter 18, Bildad comes around. And in chapter 20, Zophar comes around. 3 sets of speeches by each of these men trying to wear Job down into confessing his sin. I got to tell you, I tried to think of what the modern equivalent would be. And I don't want to get political or anything like that, but it made me think about the fact that there have been people that have been innocent that have been put in interrogation rooms and kept in there for 12, 16, 18, 20 hours, wearing them down until they finally say what, what's that? Yeah, until they finally say, okay, I can't take this anymore. And there have been false confessions. because they just were worn down. To me, that's about the closest equivalent I can see of what we see going on in the book of Job. They just, why don't you confess? Because God is a fair God. He's a just God. And the only reason he would be punishing you right now is because you have sinned. Now, this brings us to a second very real principle. You and I do not see what goes on in the invisible world. His friends, they didn't know the conversations that were taking place between God and Satan. They didn't know. And you and I, when we have suffering come into our lives and into our world, we don't know what's taking place behind the scenes. I would dare to say there have been some times that you and I have escaped death and never even knew it. That God acted on our part, or his angels, acted in a providential way. Maybe you missed an accident by a few seconds. Maybe you missed an accident by 30 minutes because you got held up someplace, and had your day gone the way that it was going, you might have been at the wrong place at the wrong time. I do believe we don't see what goes on in the invisible world. We don't know the angels that are fighting for us, and we don't know the demons that are fighting, against us. When we have a song of decision on Sunday morning, you and I have no idea what's going on in the invisible world of, trying to make sure that people don't get out of their pew and come forward and make a decision for Christ. I know that might sound, goofy to some of it, but I think it's very real. We live, that's the kind of world that we live in, where there is a physical world and we are so very tied to it, but there is also a spiritual world that you and I, we don't see and we don't know. Job's friends had no idea what was going on in the spiritual realm. And so they keep trying to encourage him, give up.
Like Elijah, was it Elijah or Elijah? I think it was Elijah who, in the story of Naaman, and he said to his servant, "Open up your eyes."
Yeah.
And saw all of that going on.
I think you and I would be very, very frightened if we could get a glimpse into the spiritual world and what's taking place. This author is not so popular anymore, but when I was in Bible college, I loved reading Frank Peretti. And if any of you have ever heard of Frank Peretti, he has a book called This Present Darkness, and then he followed it up with another book called Piercing the Darkness. And it's a fictional book, but it's kind of based on, what really goes on in our world, in not only the physical realm, but the spiritual realm. And so we see that. In chapter 28 of Job, though, we get a little bit of an interlude. And we just get some wisdom. And chapter 28 really talks about where true wisdom comes from. See, each of his three friends came and they thought they were bringing Job great wisdom. They thought they were going to solve his problems with their own human reasoning. But one of the main messages of the book of Job is this: true wisdom and true understanding, even when it comes to our own suffering, that can only come from God, not from our own intellect, not from our own common sense, not from our own, abilities. And so we see that. Now, then as we move in through these chapters, 29 and 30 and 31, we get to chapter 32, and a fourth friend comes. Yeah, we don't know. He disappears. We don't know. But a fourth friend comes named Elihu. And Elihu, he kind of gives a little bit of a different twist to things and says, well, listen, just because you're suffering, it doesn't mean that God is unjust. God can still be just. But, just if there is sin in your life, go ahead and confess it. Now, I love as we get closer to the end of Job. Job's one desire, again, is to know why. And one of his wishes is, and we probably have had this wish as well, man, if I could just sit down and have a little conversation with God, and maybe he could help me understand why such and such has happened in my life. You know, I lost a loved one. If I could just sit down and talk to him, Ken says, just think how much worse Job's life would have been if he did confess to sin that he didn't commit. You know, that's a very true point. But you and I often think I'm surely not the only one that's ever thought that in my life. If I could just sit down and have a little conversation with God and just say, God, could you explain to me why? You know, could you explain to me why, you know, a sister loses her battle with cancer? Could you explain to me why, you know, such and such happened? We sometimes wish for that. Job gets that wish. He gets to have a little conversation with God. And when he finally gets a word with God, does he ever give God a word? And he really questions God, not in a disrespectful way, but really wanting some answers. And isn't it wonderful that at the end of Job, God gives him all the answers to all the reasons that he suffered? Is no one gonna point that out, that's not what happens? God does not give Job the reasons for his suffering. He doesn't tell him about the conversation that he had with the devil. He doesn't tell him what was going on in the spiritual realm. Instead, he kind of turns it around and says, are you really going to question the one who has created the entire universe? Do you know, what is involved in not only creating the world and creating the universe, but maintaining that and working in it? And so what we finally learn from the book of Job, again, we never do find out, well, we kind of know why, because we got to see what was taking place, to prove and to show Job's faithfulness. I think probably we would say, man, wasn't there an easier way to get to that same conclusion? And we realize that God is the ultimate wisdom in the world. And so in the end, we don't find out why, but in the end, God does give Job double everything that he had from the beginning. He is rewarded. Now, just a couple quick principles that I think we can take from this. Number one, we don't have to understand why. We don't always have to be able to answer the question why.
We just have to trust.
Yeah, we do have, there is a certain amount of trust. When I was a chaplain in a hospital in Ohio, man, the one assignment I never wanted, I avoided it at all costs, was emergency room assignment. Listen, I could go in and visit folks, and this, of course, pre-COVID, this has been years and years ago, but I could visit people that, were in there because for whatever minor reasons, and they were going home in a couple of days, and I could sit and visit with them and have a pleasant conversation and feel like I had done something. But emergency room, I wanted to avoid at all costs. And I still remember that Saturday morning, they called me and they said, we need you over here in the emergency room right away. So there's been a car accident, and an older man has lost his wife and grandchildren, and we need you to go in there and talk. He wants somebody to talk to. And I was like, and so all the way to the hospital, Lord, you got to take care of this situation. I need you in this. I don't have the wisdom. I don't have the answers. And so I went into his room, and I didn't have the answers. And he asked, why? Now, I could have just said, Romans 8:28. God works together for the good, all things together for the good of those who love him. That would not have meant anything to him. And so, I just said, look, I don't know. I don't understand. I know that God is in control. And it's not, sometimes when someone loses a loved one, well, God needed another, flower for his garden. And so he chose the best. I know we hear that a lot. I don't know what the answer, I don't know why God chooses to take one and leave another. I don't know. But I know that someday, if our faith is in him, we will be in his presence. And I honestly believe that when we are in God's presence, those questions that we have had, we might think, oh, I can't wait to get to heaven so we can answer those. I honestly think that once we get to heaven and we're in his presence, those questions won't matter anymore. And so I just want to say, we don't always have to have the why. So all I did with that gentleman is I stayed in there with him for about 3 hours, and I just sat with him. I prayed with him. I cried with him. I helped him make any phone calls that he needed to make. And that's all that I did. I didn't give him some great theological reason why the car accident happened, and because we just don't know, and it's okay to not have the why. It's okay. Secondly, not only do we not have to have the why when we're suffering, but I also think this. God has pretty big shoulders. And sometimes we think, well, if I get upset with God, that makes me just a horrible person. So sometimes what people will do is something will happen in their life. They'll be upset with that. And instead of just calling out to God and crying out to him and letting that frustration and maybe even that anger out, they will bury that deep inside, and they will continue to bury that. But folks, the reality is one day that's coming back out. And it may come out at the wrong time, and it may come out on the wrong person. And so, I think God is a big enough God that he can handle a little bit of our frustration. And he can handle the fact that we don't understand, and that is disappointing for us, and that's frustrating for us. Doesn't mean that he's going to give us all the answers, but I would say it is more healthy to express that to God than to try to bury that and pretend it's not there. I don't know if that makes sense. Go ahead.
I was listening to someone who I was doing a real study, and he said, imagine, and Shakespeare says, all of the world is a stage. Mm-hmm. And everyone lines up, and this one actor gets a sheet of paper as his part, and it says, slips on banana peel, breaks his leg. Mm-hmm. And the actor is infuriated because he's an excellent actor. He should have the leading part, and he should be doing all these other things. And the director says, you don't know the play before your part, and you don't know the play after your part. Yeah. But your part is vital. Someone has to slip and fall and break their leg, and that's you.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I mean, when you think about what role we play and everything that happens, you don't know. You don't know when you're a blessing to someone else. You don't know when you come into contact with other people, how you affect them. But you trust that plan is good.
Yep, absolutely. And so, go ahead, Sandy.
I shared this with Lady Bible study, but when my first son died, 2 months old, I wasn't a Christian. I was mad for years at God. I didn't know God, but I was mad at him. I couldn't understand why. Of course I don't, but I accept it. Now, the difference is, back in the early 90s, when I became a Christian, I found my brother dead. He killed himself in Northport. The difference was I took control. I found him. I saw him there dead. He left a note, but I made all the arrangements like you're supposed to call my parents, called his wife, But I had a peace about me. And I remember very well at Bushnell, because he was a Vietnam vet.
Mhm.
The chaplain said so many boys here took their lives after coming home from Vietnam.
Yeah.
And the point being, the chaplain said to me, "You're a Christian, aren't you?" And we're sitting on bleachers.
Mhm.
Yeah, the gun salute, everything was very, very good. I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And I'm crying, I'm tearing, but I'm smiling and tearing. It's weird emotions going on. He said, "I can tell you're a Christian."
Yeah.
Because I didn't say a word,
Mhm.
but I had the peace to know. And I thought about those two incidents many times, how I reacted at one and the other.
Mhm.
And it's amazing. If you don't have God, things are so much worse.
And so, yeah, and so we don't have to have all the answers. We can express that, to God. But then also we do realize He is on the throne. And when we remember that He is on the throne, and even in times of difficulty, a lot of times we buy into this lie that, well, God never gives you more than you can handle. And we realize that nothing could be further from the truth.
Why would you need it?
Yeah, why would we need Him? If God never gives us more than we can handle on our own, well, then we don't really need Him. But He does allow more to be put on us than we can handle, because it's in those moments that we turn to Him and we trust Him and we allow Him to work in our lives. And what God often does is He works through our suffering. Not that He causes the suffering, but He works through our suffering to bring good into the lives of others. And the best example of that is even through His own Son, to allow His Son to come to this world and to suffer and to die for you and I. God did that because He knew that, He could use that to redeem us and to give us grace. And then the last thing that I just want to close with tonight is, at the end here, we see Job gets twice as much as what he started with. When you and I lose possessions, God may not replace them. When we lose loved ones, God may not, give us more loved ones. But His grace is always going to be more than enough of what we need to get through in this life.
If, before we close, if anyone has a King James Bible and would like to know a little bit more about how Job came about, there's a good piece for the chapters.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Go ahead.
I'd just like your opinion on why is Job where it is in the Bible? Because it seems like it should have been further up.
Yeah.
Like the Exodus, Genesis kind of
Yeah.
area in
Yeah.
the Bible as opposed to where it is.
Sometimes we think that the Bible was written chronologically, and it really wasn't. Now, the books of history are written kind of chronologically, but when the canon was put together, which is what we call that original set of books, the books of poetry and wisdom were all put together. That's why we have Job and Psalm and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, because those are all wisdom and poetry books. And so I do kind of love the way that the Old Testament is arranged. We used to always think, well, Genesis happened at the beginning and Zechariah happened at the end, and Malachi and at the end. And it's not arranged that way. We have, and again, we've said this before, we had the books of law, then we had the books of history. Now we have the books of wisdom and poetry. Then we're going to have the major prophets, and then we're going to have the minor prophets. And that's the Old Testament. And so I think it's where it is just because it is part of the books of wisdom. Now, they could have put the books of wisdom and poetry To me, I think it would have been good for those to be at the end of the Old Testament. Now that we've gotten through all the history, now that we've gotten through all the prophets, now let's, at the end of the Old Testament, let's give you a little bit of wisdom and poetry. You know, I think God through his Holy Spirit knew why it needed to be put together the way that it was. And so I'll trust his judgment over mine.
Study it, so you
Yes.
know where,
Yes.
you know, where it
Yes.
fits in.
Yes. Again, if I was putting all the books of the Bible together, I would have said, could we just do Deuteronomy and Leviticus right at the beginning and get them out of the way? We all have our favorite books, and we all enjoy those. Okay, Gene Hunker says, every time something really terrible happens, it gives good people opportunity to come to the aid and the help. And we really can. Our sufferings can be a form of witnessing and be a testimony to the world of how great God is. Before I pray tonight, I want to remind you, tomorrow night at 6:30, so excited about this. I hope you guys are making plans to come. Tony Wolf, come. I talked to him on the phone yesterday. Now listen, I guaranteed him that we would have at least 600 people here. So no, I'm kidding. But I talked to him yesterday. He's excited about being here tomorrow. He's bringing his guitar. He does a little bit of comedy, a little bit of music, a little bit of inspiration. So it should be a really good night. So come, bring somebody with you. And I think I'm excited to see what God does with our night tomorrow night. Okay, I'm going to pray, and then we'll be dismissed. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this night. Thank you for this time to be able to study and to be with one another. And thank you for those that have come tonight and joined us, and for those that have joined us online. Father, we thank you that we can study your word together. Father, as we go out of here tonight, we really don't know what tomorrow holds for us. We could have a very Job-like day tomorrow, but we know this: you're in control. You're going on ahead of us. You know what we're facing, and you can give us the strength. Father, you can give us everything we need to face whatever tomorrow has for us. And so we just want to trust you and love you and ask you to use us for your glory. We give you praise, Father, and it's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Yeah, safe.